I never thought my son's wedding day would end with me in a hospital bed. One minute, I was watching him exchange vows with his bride under twinkling lights at our family vineyard in Napa Valley. The next, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I found my son, my strong, independent boy who hadn't shed a tear since his high school graduation, kneeling beside my hospital bed, his face streaked with tears, gripping my hand like I might disappear. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have listened. You tried to tell me about her family, about what they did to you all those years ago." The irony wasn't lost on me. After 20 years of keeping secrets to protect him, it took me literally collapsing from stress for the truth to finally surface. My son had unwittingly married into the family that destroyed mine, and now, at 35 years old, I had no choice but to reveal the painful history I'd buried since before he was born. Growing up in a small town outside of Boston, my life seemed picture perfect from the outside. My father ran a successful local construction company, my mother taught elementary school, and our colonial-style home hosted legendary 4th of July barbecues. I was Sarah Mitchell, honor student, field hockey captain, the girl who checked all the right boxes. But behind our white picket fence, things were unraveling. My father's business partner, Richard Caldwell, was everything my dad wasn't. Harvard-educated, old money, with connections stretching from Cape Cod to Washington. The Caldwells had been in Massachusetts since the Mayflower, a fact Richard mentioned in every other sentence. Our families socialized together despite the obvious class differences. My mother constantly reminding us to use the right forks at their Beacon Hill dinner parties, while Richard's wife Eleanor scrutinized our every move. Their son, James, was 2 years older than me and treated our town like his personal kingdom. When I was 16, James took an unexpected interest in me, asking me to his prep school's winter formal. My parents were thrilled. Dad especially saw it as validation that we belonged in their circle. "This could be good for the business, Sarah," he have said, while helping me into our only family car, a sensible Ford that looked painfully out of place in the Caldwell's circular driveway. That night changed everything. After the dance, James drove us to his family's empty summer house in Chatham. What began as stolen kisses turned into something I hadn't consented to. When I returned home past curfew, disheveled and quiet, my mother mistook my shock for teenage romance. "Looks like someone had a magical evening," she'd teased, completely misreading my silence. 2 months later, the pregnancy test confirmed my fears. When I finally worked up the courage to tell James, he laughed. "That's not my problem," he said, before suggesting his gardener might be interested in taking responsibility, since those people have so many kids anyway. The casual cruelty stunned me. My parents reacted differently than I expected. Rather than the disappointment I feared, my father became enraged, not at me, but at the Caldwells. He stormed into their office the next day, demanding James do right by me. The following week, my father was arrested for embezzlement. The evidence was irrefutable, or so it seemed. Business accounts drained, signatures forged, and paper trails all pointing to Dad. Richard Caldwell stood solemnly at a press conference, expressing his profound disappointment in his partner of 15 years. My father, broken and bewildered, took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial. The night before he went to prison, he held my hand across our kitchen table. "I never touched that money, Sarah. Remember that. But fighting people like the Caldwells, it costs more than we have." With Dad in prison and our family name disgraced, my mother moved us to California to live with her sister. I graduated high school 5 months pregnant, no longer the golden girl, but the cautionary tale. When my son Matthew was born, I held him with a fierce determination that the Caldwell legacy would never touch him. I never put James's name on the birth certificate. As far as the world knew, Matthew's father was not in the picture, a phrase I repeated so often it became almost true even to me. I worked 3 jobs while finishing community college, then state university, eventually landing a position at a tech company in Silicon Valley. I built a life for us brick by brick, each achievement a quiet defiance against the humiliation the Caldwells had inflicted. My father died of a heart attack 2 years into his sentence, never getting the chance to meet his grandson or clear his name. My mother passed away from cancer when Matthew was 10, taking with her the last person besides me who knew the complete truth. For 25 years, I kept the Caldwell secret buried, a grave marked only in my memory. Last spring, Matthew called with news that made my heart skip. He was engaged. His voice bubbled with excitement as he described how he'd proposed to Eliza during their hiking trip in Yosemite. I'd only met her twice, both brief encounters when I visited them in Seattle where Matthew worked as a software engineer. She seemed pleasant enough, if a bit reserved around me, with her designer clothes and that particular polished poise that comes from East Coast privilege. Her family's coming to San Francisco next month, Matthew said. They want to take us to dinner to celebrate. They're pretty traditional and want to do this whole formal meet the parents thing. The weeks before the dinner, I threw myself into preparation. New dress, hair appointment, even practicing small talk in the mirror. This dinner mattered to Matthew, so it mattered to me. We agreed to meet at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Bay Bridge, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices. I arrived early, nervously adjusting my outfit in the restaurant's bathroom mirror. A text from Matthew. Running 15-minute late. Eliza's parents are already at the table 12 by the window. I walked toward the table, rehearsing my introduction. Then I saw them. Richard and Eleanor Caldwell, barely aged despite the decades, sipping wine like no time had passed. The room tilted beneath me. Richard looked up, his expression shifting from polite anticipation to shocked recognition. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, not as a question but as an accusation. Eleanor's wineglass froze midway to her lips. What is the meaning of this? I stood paralyzed, unable to form words, as Matthew and Eliza approached from behind me. "Mom, you've met Eliza, and these are her parents, Richard and Eleanor Caldwell," Matthew said, beaming with pride. The dinner that followed was an exercise in surreal theater. Richard recovered quickly, smoothly explaining that he might have done business with my father years ago. Eleanor maintained a glacial smile while gripping her knife like she might use it for purposes other than cutting her overpriced steak. Eliza watched the dynamics unfold with calculating eyes that suddenly seemed so familiar. James's eyes. "And where is James tonight?" I finally managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. "My brother's in Tokyo on business," Eliza replied. "He's disappointed to miss this, but he's flying in for the engagement party next month." James was her brother, not her father. Some small mercy in this nightmare. Matthew wasn't falling in love with his half-sister, just his cousin. The realization brought no comfort. As the evening progressed, Richard dominated the conversation with plans for the small, intimate wedding of 300 guests at their Napa estate, which they'd purchased, he mentioned pointedly, after consolidating some business interests in Massachusetts. Each word was a carefully placed landmine in the field of our shared history. "Matthew tells us you're a single mother," Eleanor said during dessert, somehow making it sound like an infectious disease. That must have been challenging. "It had its moments," I replied, watching Matthew's expression darken at her tone. "We've always emphasized family loyalty," Richard continued. "The Caldwell name opens doors. We take care of our own." His eyes locked with mine. "It's unfortunate when people try to, shall we say, cash in on connections they haven't earned." Matthew looked between us, sensing the undercurrents but missing their source. "Mom's never relied on anyone. She built everything herself." "I'm sure she did," Richard said with a thin smile. "Some people are very resourceful when they need to be."
By the time the check arrived, my hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them in my lap. Richard insisted on paying, waving away Matthew's protests with the practiced magnanimity of a man accustomed to using money as power. In the following weeks, the Caldwells methodically took over wedding planning, overruling venue choices, guest lists, even the date. Matthew called me one evening, frustration evident in his voice. "They've moved the wedding up to next month and changed it to their vineyard," he said. "I don't understand why Eliza won't stand up to them."
And they're insisting you can't bring a +1 because of space constraints, even though they've invited 90 of their friends. The final blow came 3 days before the wedding. A thick envelope arrived containing legal papers, a non-disclosure agreement regarding any and all past interactions with the Caldwell family, along with a goodwill gesture check for $250,000. Richard's handwritten note read simply, "For Matthew's future happiness, I trust you'll make the right decision." The message was clear: take the money and keep the past buried, or risk destroying my son's relationship. I left the check untouched, but packed the NDA in my suitcase as I headed to Napa, a storm building inside me. The Caldwell Vineyard was a postcard-perfect setting: rolling hills covered with orderly rows of vines, a stone terrace overlooking the valley, market lights strung between ancient oak trees. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been tense but manageable, with Richard strategically seating me at the farthest table from the family. On the wedding day, I helped Matthew straighten his bow tie in a private moment before the ceremony. "You look just like your grandfather," I told him, my voice catching. "Mom, is everything okay? You've seemed off since we announced the engagement." I forced a smile. "Just emotional about my only son getting married." The ceremony began as the golden California sun started its descent. Matthew stood tall at the altar, while I sat alone in the front row on the groom's sparsely populated side. The string quartet played Pachelbel, and Eliza appeared on Richard's arm, looking eerily like Eleanor had decades earlier. As they exchanged vows, Richard caught my eye from across the aisle, a slight smirk playing at his lips. The minister asked if anyone objected to the union. My heart hammered, but I remained silent. I couldn't ruin this moment for Matthew, despite everything. The reception began with champagne and forced pleasantries. Eleanor made a point of introducing me to their friends as Matthew's mother without using my name, as if my identity was solely defined by my relationship to my son. I overheard her telling a guest, "No father in the picture, unfortunately. Some women just make poor choices." After dinner, the speeches began. Richard took the microphone, champagne flute in hand. "When Matthew came into our lives, I wasn't sure what to expect," he began. "A young man raised by a single mother, without the guidance of a father figure." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Matthew's jaw tightened. "But he's proven himself worthy of the Caldwell name and legacy. Though he wasn't born into privilege, we welcome him into our family. A fresh start, you might say." He turned directly to me, and to Sarah, who's managed to raise such a fine young man despite challenging circumstances. "Your resilience is commendable, even if your methods have sometimes been questionable." The room began to spin. Decades of suppressed rage and humiliation boiled over as Richard continued. "Family secrets can be burdensome things," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "But tonight, we put the past behind us and look toward a united future." I stood up, knocking over my water glass. "You want to talk about family secrets, Richard?" Matthew looked at me in alarm. Eliza froze mid-smile. Eleanor hissed something to a nearby server. "Mom," Matthew said quietly, "maybe this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I replied, my voice stronger than it had been in years. I stepped toward the center of the room. "Your new father-in-law destroyed my family. His son assaulted me when I was 16 years old. And when I got pregnant, Richard framed my father for embezzlement to silence us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard's face hardened as he stepped toward me. "Sarah is clearly unwell," he announced, perhaps overwhelmed by the emotions of the day. "I've been silent for 25 years, I continued, my voice rising. "My father died in prison for a crime he didn't commit.
Your precious family name was protected while ours was destroyed. I turned to Matthew, whose face had drained of color. I never told you because I wanted to protect you from this ugliness. I wanted you to grow up without that shadow. She's delusional, Richard cut in sharply. This is ancient history, twisted to suit her narrative. We helped her father when he made poor decisions. You offered me money yesterday to keep quiet, I interrupted, pulling the NDA from my purse. Just like you tried to pay me off 25 years ago. Eleanor moved toward Eliza, who stood rigid with shock.
Matthew stepped away from his bride, staring at his new father-in-law with dawning horror. "Is this true?" he demanded of Richard. Before Richard could answer, the room began to tilt and darken around me. The last thing I remembered was Matthew rushing toward me as I collapsed onto the stone floor, years of stress and secrets finally overwhelming my body. I woke up in Napa Valley Hospital with the steady beep of a heart monitor for company. The doctor explained that I'd suffered from extreme stress and dehydration, my body finally rebelling against decades of carried weight. When she left, I noticed Matthew sitting in the corner of the room, his wedding suit rumpled, tie discarded. "How long have I been out?" I asked, my throat dry. "About 6 hours," he said, moving to my bedside. His eyes were red-rimmed. "The wedding reception, it's over." He took my hand, kneeling beside the bed. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have listened. You tried to tell me about her family, about what they did to you all those years ago." I squeezed his hand. "You couldn't have known." "After you collapsed, everything fell apart," Matthew continued. "Richard tried to play it off, but Eliza's cousin pulled me aside. She said there had always been whispers in the family about James and a girl from the wrong side of the tracks who'd caused problems. She believed you." A nurse interrupted, checking my vitals before leaving us alone again. "Where's Eliza?" I finally asked. Matthew's expression hardened. "She knew, Mom. Not everything, but enough. She admitted her parents had warned her about you before we got engaged, told her you might try to cause trouble because of old business disagreements. She never thought to mention this to me." My heart broke for him. "Matthew." "I've called a lawyer," he interrupted. "Two, actually. One for an annulment and another who specializes in wrongful conviction cases. Dad's case can be reopened with new evidence." "What evidence? It's been 25 years. Matthew pulled out his phone. "I recorded Richard at the hospital. He came here right after you were admitted, tried to threaten me with cutting Eliza off if I enabled your delusions. He admitted to knowing about James and you, said they'd handled it appropriately at the time." I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. "Your grandfather always said the truth would come out eventually." The next morning, Eleanor appeared in my hospital room, perfectly coiffed despite the circumstances. "I won't insult you by pretending I didn't know," she said, standing stiffly at the foot of my bed. "But you should know I didn't approve of how Richard handled things." "You stood by while my father went to prison," I replied. "Your silence made you complicit." She placed an envelope on the bed. "James kept a journal back then. He wrote about what happened with you. Richard doesn't know I have it." Her voice wavered. "I've made many compromises to keep my family intact, Sarah. Too many. Perhaps it's time for the truth." After she left, I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a yellowed page torn from a journal, James's handwriting detailing his conquest of the partner's daughter and his father's plan to take care of the situation permanently. It was dated 2 weeks before my father's arrest. The next few months passed in a whirlwind. Matthew postponed his return to Seattle, taking leave from his job to stay with me in California. The annulment proceeded without contest. Eliza, it seemed, wanted distance from the scandal as much as Matthew did. The district attorney reopened my father's case based on the new evidence. James, summoned back from Tokyo, invoked his Fifth Amendment rights but couldn't escape the damning evidence of his own written words. Richard's carefully constructed veneer began to crack under scrutiny. Former business associates came forward with their own stories of manipulation and coercion. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, the headlines announced Richard Caldwell's indictment on multiple charges of fraud, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. The statute of limitations protected James from criminal charges for what he'd done to me, but the court of public opinion offered its own form of justice as the Caldwell family retreated from social circles they'd once dominated. My father's conviction was posthumously overturned. Standing on the courthouse steps as the announcement was made, I felt a weight lift, not completely, but enough to stand straighter than I had in decades. The unexpected twist came 6 months after the failed wedding. Matthew was helping me sort through old photos when we found one of my parents on their wedding day. "I wish I could have known him," Matthew said, studying his grandfather's face. "Me too," came a voice from the doorway. We both turned to see Eliza, looking different somehow, less polished, more authentic. "I've been in therapy," she said to our surprised expressions, trying to understand how I never saw my family for what they were. She stepped into the room hesitantly. "I found out my father's company is being investigated for labor violations overseas. The same pattern, different victims." Matthew stood, his posture guarded. "Why are you here, Eliza?" "To return this," she said, pulling out a small wooden box I recognized immediately, my father's handcrafted jewelry box that had disappeared during our hasty move from Boston. "It was in my parents' storage unit. I thought you should have it back." Inside was my mother's wedding ring and my father's pocket watch, family treasures I thought lost forever. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Eliza continued, "just a chance to help make something right." She left her contact information, not for reconciliation with Matthew, but for the civil case my lawyers were building. Another Caldwell turning against the family, an ally I never expected. That night, Matthew and I sat on my porch watching the sunset. "What now?" he asked. I thought about the journey, from frightened teenage girl to determined single mother to a woman who had finally reclaimed her story. "Now we build something new," I answered, "something honest." The Caldwell case settled out of court last month. No amount of money can replace what my father lost, but the settlement is funding a foundation in his name for wrongful conviction cases. Matthew runs it now, working alongside a team of lawyers committed to justice for families like ours. As for me, I finally started writing the memoir I've put off for years. There's power in telling your own story in your own words. Eliza occasionally sends information that helps fill in the blanks, her own form of atonement. When people ask if I regret speaking up at the wedding, I tell them my only regret is waiting so long. The truth doesn't always arrive in the moment we plan. Sometimes it crashes in when we're least prepared. But silence has its own cost, one I paid for 25 years. If you're carrying a secret that's become too heavy, know that you deserve to put it down. The people who truly love you will help you bear the weight of your truth, even when it's difficult to hear. If you found value in my story, please subscribe to this channel for more narratives about family, resilience, and finding your voice. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your narrative. Remember, the most powerful words in any language are the ones that break the silence.